Hey everybody, welcome to another video, and today we are going to be making sauerkraut, but just not any sauerkraut. This is a wonderfully gourmet, extremely delicious beet and garlic and caraway sauerkraut. And so stay tuned because we're going to share some secrets with you on how to have repeatable success every time. Okay, now first of all, let me start off by saying is that I wanted to make this a 4-minute video on how to make sauerkraut, but I just couldn't do it. And so you need to know that this video has been several weeks in the making. I wanted to take you from the very beginning to the very end where we tasted it and show you every single step along the way. And so the biggest problem that we hear about people making sauerkraut is that they cannot get repeatable results. Every single batch they make tastes completely different. They have a huge failure rate. And so what I want to do is I want to cover some very basics. Things like how much salt should we put in? What's the ratio of cabbage to other ingredients? How much should I fill my container up with? Should I add extra water? You know, things like that. And so let's start with the cabbage. First, you want to get your hands on as fresh of a cabbage as you can get your hands on. If you can get organic, that's even better. But the fresher the cabbage, the more moisture it's going to have inside. And so that's always going to be a really good thing. So otherwise, you're going to have a fairly dry sauerkraut. And as you can see right now, we're just removing some of the outer leaves and we're taking the core out. Now, when it comes to slicing your cabbage, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's not really one really good right way. For us, we have a food processor called a RoboCoupe that does an extraordinary job slicing cabbage. And so all the cabbage heads have been rinsed and washed so there's no dirt on them. And the outer leaves are being put into a bowl, stainless steel bowl, because what I want to do is I want to sort of rinse these, disinfect them, and save them for later. This is going to be what we're going to use to cover the sauerkraut with. So depending on how much sauerkraut you're making, you may not need a bunch of leaves. But I'm going to go ahead and pour a little bit of vinegar. And so I'm going to put about 4 cups of vinegar just right on top of it. And this is just regular distilled, white vinegar that you would use to clean with or you have in your kitchen. And then I'm going to add about a gallon of water. So if you're not making an enormous batch, then your ratio of vinegar to water is going to be 1 to 4. So, 1 cup of vinegar to 4 cups of water. And you're just going to want to let it soak. Every once in a while, you're going to want to pat it down. And this is going to be sitting from just somewhere on your countertop for anywhere between 30, 45 minutes to 3 or 4 hours. It really doesn't matter all that much how long you let it sit. And so at this point, once that's done, you're going to put it to the side and you're going to go ahead and get your cabbage ready to slice. You want to slice it as thin as possible. The thinner you slice it, the more moisture it's going to release, and the better your sauerkraut's going to be. And so just as I had this sitting on my counter, I wanted to show you. This is completely different and totally random, but if you ever want to make an eggplant dish and you want to remove that bitterness from the eggplant, then the absolute best way to do it is to let them soak in a brine for about 2.5 hours. So we're making eggplant parm, and I just happen to have it on my countertop. All right, so as you can see, I'm going to run this cabbage through this RoboCoupe, and this thing just shreds it beautifully. So if you happen to have a food processor that has a chute on it, you don't want to put it in your chopper, then this is a great tool to use as well. But otherwise, a mandolin, you can break out the knives and practice your knife skills. That also works real good. We normally do anywhere from 60 to 70 pounds at a time. And so we're making 2 batches today. We're making this one, which is beet and garlic, and we're making a Mexican sauerkraut. So I'll make a video about that next time. So our total is 10 kilos, 10.73 kilos, all right? Now, here's where it's going to get fun. 10.73 kilos, we need to convert that into grams. All right, so at any point, if you need to pause this video, by all means, pause it and read it slowly. I'm going to have all this written in the section below. But 10.73 kilos is 10,730 grams. And I'm going to multiply that number by each one of those percentages. And that's going to give me the amount in grams of each one of the ingredients. Then I'm going to add all those ingredients together, and I'm going to multiply that total weight by 2%. And that's going to give me how much salt I need. Complicated, right? Well, this is how we do it commercially, and this is how we get repeatable results. So let's do it a little differently. Let's say your cabbage weighs 1,000 grams. You're going to multiply 1,000 by 1.3%, and that's going to give you 13 grams. Well, that's how much garlic you need. And you're going to do the same thing for beets and caraway. Well, then you're going to add up all those ingredients: cabbage, garlic, beets, and caraway, and that is going to give you a total weight. In this case, it's 1,335.6. Once you get your total weight, you need to figure out how much salt do I want to add to this sauerkraut. Well, we're going to add 2%. And so you multiply that number by 2%. And there you go. So that's one of the tricks commercially of how we get repeatable results every single time, is that we know specifically how much each ingredient is going in. And so there's no guessing game. We know the cabbage, the salt, the garlic, the caraway, and the beets. And so it's all a very precisely measured formula that I just shared with you. And like I said, I'm going to post that below. And that way, every single time you make this sauerkraut, it's not only going to turn out amazing, but you can almost count on it. And that's always really cool. So clean, peel, and dice your beets. You can also grate them. I don't like grated beets because they tend to get lost in the cabbage. And for me personally, I like the texture of having them diced quite small. But it's completely up to you. If you would rather grate them, then by all means, grate them up. Not a problem. And so as you can see, we're measuring our quantity out of beets. And that is a lot of beets. And so in addition to this beet sauerkraut, we're also going to be making a fermented beet drink called Beet Kvass. And if you don't know what that is, then go to one of our videos. We have already made a video about Beet Kvass. And that is just an extraordinary health tonic. Anyway, so once we're done separating our beets, we're going to go ahead and mix all this together. Remember now, we have the garlic, salt, and caraway already pre-measured. And now we have our cabbage already ready to go. And so we're just going to add all those ingredients right now and mix them up really good. And you're going to see what happens here as we do this. And so next, I'm going to grab my garlic and sprinkle that right on top. This is such a wonderful fermented product right here. You're going to notice that if you do go down this road, you're going to quickly realize this is extraordinary. This will far surpass any sauerkraut that you've probably ever tasted. The beets give it a wonderful earthiness. It's not sweet because the sugars have been eaten up by the lactic acid, but it's tangy. The caraway just adds a really wonderful dimension to the flavor profile. Now you get to add your salt and caraway, but don't add it all at once. You want to add it a little bit at a time and in layers. So as you mix it all together, you're going to add a little bit more. Mix it all together, you're going to add a little bit more until you finally get it all mixed up, and it'll start to draw the moisture out of the cabbage. As we're mixing it, we're incorporating all the different flavors, all the different ingredients. You know, that salt is really pulling that moisture out, and as it's doing that, you notice the entire mass is getting smaller and smaller. Now that we're completely done mixing the cabbage, we're going to pat it down. There should be some juice that's forming it from the salt that's really starting to pull it out of the cabbage. And I want to introduce you to Mr. Bubbles. Mr. Bubbles. This is an extraordinary piece of pottery that we have specifically designed for fermentation. This particular one is called a Bolsławik. It's a Polish crock pot. And I'll put a link below in case you're interested, or you know, they come in a bunch of different sizes. But we're going to go ahead and put this cabbage in, and look, you know, you could start to see a lot of juice has been pulled from the cabbage. And it's now time to go ahead and stuff it. So I'm giving it one final little toss, and nothing complicated. Right now we're just, mixing it all up. Once it goes into that crock pot, it's going to get pounded a little bit more, and then we're going to let it rest for about 3 weeks. But let's go ahead and put it in the crock pot and get it going like that. This crock pot will fit roughly about 35 pounds of cabbage, of sauerkraut. And so for the typical sauerkraut consumer, that's just way too much. And so what most people do is they'll end up with like a 5 liter or maybe even a 10 liter crock pot. And that way, you can work in small batches and not have just an excess of sauerkraut that is taking up all your refrigeration. And so we typically, when we make, we almost have something going all the time, but there's generally about 6 fermentation vessels going on at any given moment in our kitchen. And generally each one of them has a different flavor, Caribbean, Mexican, in this case beet. We've done some really cool flavors. That black garlic, we did a ghost chili. There's a couple concepts that we were working on that just did not work out. So, experiment with sauerkraut. It's a lot of fun, and you can really push the boundaries of fermented food when you start to get comfortable playing with it. So we've got all of it in. Now I'm just going to clean up my station right quick. And what I want to do is I want to sort of tamper it down. I want to tamp it down, and this is going to help release a little bit of the moisture as well. And what we want to do is we want to compact it down as tight as we can. And so this is going to help with the fermentation. It's going to help with the colonization of the bacteria. It's just a lot of really cool benefits that happen. And so by allowing it to macerate first, and then going ahead and tamping it down in this stage, we're gonna create a very tight woven complex city of microbiological activity. Now that 2% salt that you added, that's the perfect ratio. Sometimes people will say add more, others they'll say add less. We found that at 2% you can really get awesome results, and your end result isn't going to be too salty. And if you put too little salt, you're going to have unwanted mold grow in it. And so after you pound it down, you're going to notice a lot of juice continuing to form. Well, we're going to add the juice from the... Notice I'm adding the juice from the bin last because I don't want it splashing as I'm, pounding it down. Now, if you're working in a 1-quart jar, this is obviously really easy to do. Now we are pulling those leaves from that stainless bowl, and we're just going to go ahead and arrange them in such a way that they create a bit of a blanket on top of our cabbage. And what we don't want is we don't want the majority of that cabbage rising to the top. We want everything to stay under the brine, and this is really a cool trick to make that happen. Generally, these crock pots come with these weighted stones, and those work out really good. Although there are options for mason jars where you can you can go to Amazon.com and find these really cool options for mason jars that allow you to have your sauerkraut weighted down so it doesn't float up. This is some really cool attachments. I'll put some links to those as well, so that way you can see what I'm talking about. The idea is that you want to create a oxygen-free environment. And so if you can limit the amount of oxygen to 0 that enters into the crock pot, you're going to end up with a much better result. And so how we do it with this is when we put the lid on it, we fill that moat with water, and that keeps oxygen from coming in, but it allows the carbon dioxide to be released as it's fermenting. So now that we've got our cabbage leaves all ready to go, we're going to go ahead and put the stone weights right on top of the cabbage leaves, and we're going to try to push it down a little bit. Now, this is a good batch, and usually they tend to be when you get really fresh cabbage, but I've got about an inch of brine already above my rocks. And so we're going to go ahead and clean it off one last time before we put our lid on it. And this kind of goes without saying, is you want to make sure that all your equipment is clean. You know, your rocks have been sterilized. Boil them in a mix of 50-50 water and vinegar. You know, you definitely want to add a little bit of water right here. This is going to prevent oxygen from coming back in. And you're going to go ahead and close it off. Now, you're going to check it one time 24 hours from now. And the only reason you're going to check it is to check your water level. This is what it should sound like. If you've got at least an inch of water above your rocks, close the lid and don't touch it for 21 days. Now, we're now 21 days later, and my favorite part of making sauerkraut is about to happen. And so please make sure to read the recipe below, because there's going to be things in the recipe that we just don't have enough time to cover. One of those issues is temperature. Temperature greatly affects the condition of your sauerkraut. Not only does it affect the texture, but it will also affect the flavor. And so ideally you want to let your sauerkraut ferment anywhere between 65 to about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The lower the better. Now, if it's lower, it's going to take a little bit longer, but we found that if you're in that 70 to 72 degree range, at about 3 weeks, you're going to achieve just a wonderful, tangy, crispy, not salty sauerkraut. And I think that's what most people look for. But truth is, you can technically start eating it after the 3rd day. If you don't care about the bacterial growth, you can bust into that at day 3, and if you like the way it tastes, get after it. But there's basically 3 stages of bacteria development. Each stage requires a certain amount of time and a certain type of temperature. And so, you know, if you're too hot, then a certain type of bacteria is not going to grow, and it's going to affect the way stage 2 develops. And then if stage 2 doesn't develop properly, it's going to affect the way stage 3 develops. And so you really want to try to keep the parameters right, 65 to 72. And then obviously, you know, if you want to go tangier, you're going to let your sauerkraut ferment longer. We personally like a tangier fermented sauerkraut. That's going to be roughly about 30 days, give or take, 30 to 45 days. And that's quite awesome. But that's how you make this sauerkraut. So thanks for watching this video. And like I said, refer to the recipe below, as the recipe is going to be a little more detailed as far as the parameters and the conditions. So I hope you get a chance to make it. If you do, leave me a comment below and let me know what you thought. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and give it a thumbs up if you like this video. And we'll see you in the kitchen.